we're live. We're joined this hour by the current poet laureate of San Francisco, Kim Schuck. This is very, very exciting. This is a Daw Center for the Arts production, part of our signature speaker series. The Daw Center for Art is a not-for-profit in Pomona, California. We're an art gallery, an art lab. We seek to serve Pomona and the surrounding communities. And now that the world's on the internet, we are servicing the world. So we're really, really excited to be presenting the series, and we're really, really excited to have Kim Schuck with us this hour. Kim, can you share with us, before we get started, can you share with us a poem?
Yes, I can. And I'm honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you.
Right. The reason my poetry isn't working is because that. Coming down into Eureka Valley. This hillside remembers being wild, and the trees still talk about the orchard that replaced purple bunch and rattlesnake grass. The arroyo. Salamanders coil under ceramic pots and sing songs about wet years under the bay laurel, and the yerba buena explains the fog and how the hillsides came to be. White roses grew from rootstock after the grafts failed, and the bearded iris bolted. Every 10 years or so, saffron crocus bloom under the Mirabelle plums.
Fantastic, fantastic. So what collection is that from? Or is that completely new?
This is from Deer Trails, which was the laureate book from City Lights. So
yeah,
they
so I
do
wanna
a book with if you're a laureate in San Francisco, they do a book with you through City Lights.
So I want to get into City Lights, get into laureateship, working with the San Francisco Library. But before any of that happened, you began to write poetry. And
It did, yeah.
So can you tell us a story about how you first began writing poetry, began sharing poetry? Take us to that.
So I have been doing it for so long that no living person remembers how I started writing poetry, which gets daunting. So I asked my mother, and she said that she didn't know. And we sort of had a big family talk about it because it's a question I get asked often. And we decided that nobody knows, but I've been doing it forever. So probably since I learned how to write. And then I found out that everybody thought some of my poems were about different things than they were about, which is still true. So I guess a lot doesn't change. But I've been known as someone who writes poetry since about 1982. Carol Lee Sanchez, who used to organize the readings at the Coffee Gallery in North Beach, was sort of a mentor of mine. She used to call me her daughter. I called her mom, and she organized those. And at one point, she got tired of me being shy about my work and just stuck me on stage.
So what was that like first when you first got stuck on stage and you were sharing your work? What were you feeling in the moment?
Wow. I was petrified. My mom says that I've never been shy about stage, but it just might be that I'm not clear that that's what it is. I kind of have created this character that I am in public, but my preference is to, you do this thing as a poet that is generally done alone in a room without other people. And if you hit a certain lick with it, they put you in front of a huge group of people as a reward. And I think if they told me that at the outset, I probably wouldn't have done poetry. Most of the poets that I know have a huge streak of shyness in them and have created such a character, So
yeah. So can you describe like this character that you've created? Is it just yourself amplified, or is it a whole new? Is it when you don the hat? I mean, when
Yeah,
does
absolutely about the hat, actually. People ask me about the hat, and it's like, why are you always wearing a hat? I'm like, and I don't in my life. So if you encounter me walking around in the city, I won't be wearing a hat. And the fun part is that a lot of people don't actually recognize me.
do you ever play with that and all of a sudden like they're like just kind of like you see someone you recognize and they just like look past you and then you put on the hat and you're like, oh.
No, I don't do that, but I was prepping for a reading at Bird and Beckett one time, and this very young female poet sat down next to me and went, I hear she's going to be here. And I was like, who? Who is going to be here? She said, the poet laureate, I hear she's going to be here. And I was like, yes, she is going to be here. And I was just like, this is really funny. And then we talked about her work for a while and what she was doing. And I looked at my watch and I went, I better get this started. And she was like, oh my God, you're her. I was like, yeah, but I'm not her all the time. You know? I'm
Oh,
selectively her. Mm-hmm. And also, she made me very happy because she said I didn't look a thing like one of my least favorite photographs. So.
that's funny. All right. So there was the first that first reading series open mic that you were at. What were some of the other ones you attended at the time?
Ooh. I'm just old enough, and please don't do the math, to have attended some of the bar readings, Cafe Babar readings. I used to go to, um, I don't know, so to be clear, my mother was born in the mission, and I went to school for most of my time in the mission, and the family house is kind of at the triple point of the Castro mission and Noe Valley, like up there on the hill. And so I spent a lot of time in the mission. And also there's a place that used to be on 24th Street called Meat Market Coffee House, which is absolutely a hippie joint. And there were a lot of places in the Haight, and which is obviously also very available. So I went to most of the readings, but I didn't read at them for the most part. And I only really started, I want to say, uh, I did a book with Bill Vartnaw, Torian Horn Press. Torian Horn has published Paula Gunn Allen, Carol Lee Sanchez, Gail Mitchell, QR Hand. He's got a really amazing back catalog. And he published one of my books. And in advertising that book, I ended up doing readings at Sacred Grounds, which I'd never been to, which I should have been to before. So I ended up featuring at different places. And that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
So in terms of that was the first publication that was sort of here. Most of my publications have been through native magazines, mostly initially, and then a native press. So really working in San Francisco as a poet, I mostly harvested information about what poeting was in San Francisco, but I used it elsewhere.
Yeah.
For a long time.
Yeah. Well, I'm very interested in finding out more about these native publications. Before we do that, though, I'd be remiss because this question of Cafe Barbar, this venue, Cafe Barbar, has come up in multiple conversations throughout these interviews. Can you tell us about what your experience was like there?
Okay, Cafe Babar and also La Pena. I'd go and listen to other people whose names I'd heard, but I'd heard them kind of. It was lateral, not top down. So and Jerry Faraz, who read there an awful lot, was my mother grew up with his older siblings, so we're connected, right? But it did sort of feel like sitting at the big kid table, you know. Basically that. I mean, it was definitely um, louder, more ambivalent than I generally like in my world, but really intellectually nourishing,
Mm.
if that makes sense. I
Yeah.
mean, there are a lot of very famous poets who came through, the famous San Francisco poets, you know, important to San Francisco poets, right? Um, Cafe Babar, the Coffee Galleria, um, these kinds of places were, you know, and of course, City Lights, of course, City Lights, and some of the other places. You know, there used to be different cultures in different cities, and now here we are global, right? But there used to be a reason to go to different places that was generally to encounter these other cultures and cultural contexts. And Cafe Babar was definitely um, that kind of lower knowing mission context, right? So, yeah. I mean, it was a flavor of that area, and it was definitely different from sort of the beat poets, and it was definitely different from the more um, so it wasn't North Beach and it wasn't the hate. It was the mission, you know? So I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, no, no. It makes sense. It makes sense. It was a definite segment of the city. So I'm really curious to talk about some of these early publications,
Mhm.
some of these native presses. Do you remember, like, can you tell us about some of these?
Oh, absolutely. The first time I was ever published um, in a serious anthology, I guess, was by the Anokan Press. Maybe is it an anthology or is it a journal? Probably a journal. The Anokan Press Gatherings, which is a Canadian native press. Um, by the way, I'm a Cherokee citizen. And my dad's Cherokee. So. Um, yeah, and the Anokan Press, they're an incredible. They still do some really amazing stuff, and because I was published in that, I recently ended up in um, a list of Native writers who have been published in Canadian journals. I think it was also the last time I was published in a Canadian journal. It was my first big publication. And then I started getting asked to do things basically once a year. Some of the mainstream journals will do their Native American issue, if that often.
Mm.
And I started getting called to do those, which I really didn't like um, doing. And I feel like I'm Native all year long, and it's basically an intellectual ghetto, you know. They stick you over there, and then they don't have to deal with you for the rest of the year. And so that got frustrating. I stopped accepting those for the most part, unless I know. Um, Yellow Medicine Journal is a really good one. They've published me a few times before I did anything of note. Um, my first book happened because of um, an award um, that the Native Writers Circle of the Americas give out. So, Smuggling Cherokee came out through um, Greenfield Review Press, which was run by Joe Bruchac, who's a very famous Native writer. Um, Trying to think if there was any other specifically. So I've generally been in that sort of circle. The part of it that is more in Oklahoma rather than more in New Mexico or more in Minneapolis, because there are sort of nodes of that as well. So that's sort of where I locate.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about? I want to hear more about Smug Cherokee, but first, can you tell us more about Greenfield Review Press?
Um, well, Joe Bruchac and his late wife used to run this press. Um, he's published a lot of impressive people like Lance Henson and Carol Arnett, Gogishchi. And the only poem of his that I can think of right now is just not suitable for a Facebook audience. So,
All right. Well, tell us about Smug Cherokee.
Smuggling Cherokee.
Smuggling Cherokee.
Yeah, that was my first book. And it was part of winning the award, the first book award from the, the Native Writers Circle. And I don't know. It's basically, you know how your first book is everything you've written that you like up to that point. And I was so unaware. I didn't provide a table of contents, so there isn't one in that book. So I didn't know. And I don't love a whole lot of those poems anymore. And I really lumbered myself with some freight with some of what I said in there. And but there are a few, if you know what to look for, there are a few nods to traditional Cherokee literary sort of lyric traditions in that book that are still pretty good. It's way out of print at this point, and it costs an arm and a leg, but it's, I still like some, or rather, I like some of those poems again. I don't know. I think this may be a pretty common experience. You publish the book, it's your first book, it's got everything you ever liked that you wrote, you don't like it as much anymore, and then you're reading it every time you read, and you can't escape it. And if you're like me, you write at least every day, at least one poem. And you've moved beyond that, but other people still want to hear stuff. And so you're reading it. And I've kind of come full circle. I'm like, that's still a good poem. It's okay. I'll live with it. But there's still some things where you go.
You tell us about rabbit stories.
Yeah, rabbit stories, which is, they talk about it. I think Poetic Matrix Press talks about it as though it's poetry. They call it prose poems. It's I'll tell you how that happened. I was asked to write a thing. So in another life, I do math, and I think before I ever published any poetry, even I had lesson plans published by the Exploratorium in math. And I was asked to write a piece for a book that was going to be about Native American perceptions that line up with physics properties. So I wrote a piece, and then the book got indefinitely postponed. So it was almost a decade before that book came out. And so I had this chapter of a book, and I was reading pieces of it periodically, places, and doing stuff with it. And I handed it to a friend of mine who used to be a reporter for the LA Times, and he read it and he said, it's great. He said, it's a shame you couldn't maintain that tone for a whole book. And I went, huh. And that's that book. So if you're into physics and math and metaphysics, it's a fun read because everything has at least 2 or 3 meanings to it, and it all sort of ties back into quantum physics. But
So how did your interest in math? I mean, how did your interest in math bridge in poetry in this kind of in this book of poetry that's not poetry, that's not prose, that's a mathematical textbook or
it's yeah, okay, how did that happen? All right. So uh, my father, who, as I said, is Cherokee, was also an electronics engineer and a telecommunications engineer, and one of the better storytellers. He used to be one of the better storytellers that I ever knew. He goes way deep now, and it's kind of hard to get a breath. But his father, who was a drill sergeant in the Army, but had also been a gunnery sergeant, did trig in his head. So it never occurred to me that stories and mathematics were separate things, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
We
no,
have several generations of storytellers who are all about math, is what I'm saying.
right, right. No, the
Yeah.
story makes sense to me. It's the conceptual conceit or the moral of the story.
The moral of the story is, yeah, I don't know. Well, okay. So the best love letter I ever got from anybody was from a guy who was doing chaos theory, who
Mhm.
did a proving that my grandmother's assertion that when we do stomp dance, we rebalance the world is actually true. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you told me chaos theory, and I'm thinking of like Jeff Bloom in Jurassic Park with the water in his hands. He's all like,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh,
Well,
so you
I'm
got
afraid I
some
come
chaos
from
theories, guys.
yeah, I'm afraid I come from a whole community and family of people who are nerdy in that big N nerd.
Yeah. No, no, no. It sounds fascinating. It really does.
I don't know about fascinating. It definitely has its target audience, and that's who I was writing for. You know, when you start, okay, so the first book, if you get a first book, is really the breaking the glass kind of thing.
Mhm.
And thereafter, so I did it the easy way. I won a contest. Um, there are other ways to do it, but that's how I did it. And um, if you get another book, and it's not like because you're the poet laureate of San Francisco, if you get another book, the publisher will tend to ask you who your target audience is. And I've always been very clear about my target audience. My target audience is generally Native women, in particular, over 40, with who've endured academia in some way and have big connections to their traditional ritual behaviors. And that's who that book is written for. And a lot of those people bought that book. So when I was telling Poetic Matrix Press this, they said, that's a very small group of people. I was like, maybe, but uh, they will all buy it. And they did. So.
No, it's good. I mean, it may be it's small for the world, but it's not small for book sales. Um, Clouds Running In.
Clouds Running In was the book that Tori and Horn Press published for me. Um, uh, it's all in caps. It got printed all in caps as it was accidental, but two people have it was my accident. Okay,
Yeah.
it was a miscommunication, but it's interesting because people have tried to decode why that book is all in caps, and they've come to some really cool answers, which I wish were why I did it.
Mm.
Um, so two people have written master's thesis on that book. One of them said that I did it because Cherokee writing has no lowercase. That would have been a great reason. That's not why. Um, another person said that it's because the Native American voices are so small generally that you feel like you have to shout. That's also a great reason. Also not why. It's just really a miscommunication.
Yeah.
Those are two great reasons.
Yeah. So tell us about the book, other than the fact that it's all in caps.
Um, it was basically the evolution from the pieces I liked best after reading them for a couple of years from the first book, you know. deeper thoughts about certain things. So I write about water a lot. I don't do that intentionally, but I do live on a peninsula, so I guess it's not that surprising. And there's a lot of that in there. And yeah, I water in San Francisco and Cherokee stories is pretty much, we could say that about almost any of my work, so, but it's still true.
So that same year, you released a chapbook. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Sidewalk Indian came out that same year. So I had made some friends. At that point, it was online through Facebook. I had made some friends of other Native writers who I'd been published with in these small places. And one of them is a woman who was the editor of a series of books from Foothills Press, which is in New York State. And she asked me if I'd be if I do one of the chapbooks in the series. And I said, yeah. And they also did, I think Lance Henson's was number 6. Mine was number 7, which becomes a bit of a theme in my life. Yeah, so that book, as it was taking place, my daughter, my daughter passed about 8 years ago. So as that book was coming together, after we had laid it all out, I had done some poems about Bria's death, and they published some of them in that book. So there are a few of those at the end of that book.
Yeah.
It's probably still, I don't know, there's some competition now. It may be still my favorite collection of my poems because I love a lot of the pieces in there still. So, as it turns out, if you have a chapbook and a full-length book come out at the same time, they push each other in terms of attention, and it gets a lot more attention, which I didn't know would be true. I thought it would be a problem.
Yeah, so for our audience who might not be familiar, because this is it's intended for a wide variety of people who might not be so familiar, what is a chapbook?
A chapbook is basically a small collection of poems that thematically hang together. Although not always, depends on whether you get published by somebody else who's a traditionalist or whether you publish yourself. There are a lot of people who've self-published and they're not thematically cohesive. It's at least 20 pages long, but less than 60 or something like that. There's a specific designation, but mine kind of hangs together. It's when I first started really thinking about being Native away from your community is very much living in exile. And that's when I really started thinking about that. So that's what a lot of those poems are about.
Yeah. I want to get to talking about deer trails, but before we do that, can you share another poem?
Yeah, I can. See if I can get to. So I've been doing a poem a day during the sheltering in place. And I will read you today's if I can find it. It should be hanging out right here. There it is. Quarantine poem 52. The bridge meant fishing in floodwater. Like all good symbols, it was mostly borrowed, and they've renamed the river, but the part that's mine, that little experience, the woodshutter, running mostly down from Kansas. The part that's mine will die with me, and there will still be a river. You wouldn't stop playing with my hair, your impulse control being what it was, your respect for another self being what it was. So I tugged the braid away and I hit you with it. And we both laughed. It's a moment I've taken with me as I roll on over Flint all the way down to Grand Lake.
Again, I want to get into the latest collection of poetry, but before we do that, we've had the opportunity to interview Luis Rodriguez, former poet laureate of Los Angeles, Isabel Lopez, former poet laureate of New Mexico, Lee Herrick, former poet laureate of Fresno, Devin Major, former poet laureate of San Francisco, Edward Vidiere, former poet laureate of McAllen, Texas. So we've actually had the opportunity to speak to a number of former poet laureates. I usually ask them what number they are, so it doesn't sound like former, because it sounds like they lost something, like second or third or something. But you're the first current that we've got an opportunity to speak to, so I'm really, really excited about that. And I really want to ask you right now, what was it like to receive, to be named the poet laureate?
It's a huge affirmation, isn't it? I mean, it does rather challenge a fundamental facet of my personality, which is my suspicion that I'm a total imposter. And then they hand you this thing, and you're like, maybe not. So, what's it like? I got to be poet laureate in a weird way. I didn't nominate myself, and I didn't suggest that anybody else do it either, really. I was approached by somebody who told me that they had heard I was going to be the next poet laureate of San Francisco. And I laughed. And then I was approached a couple weeks later by somebody who asked if they could nominate me. And I said, sure, why not? And they said, well, would you do it if you got named laureate? I said, yeah, why not? I thought I could think of 5 people I think would be getting that honor before I get it. So I didn't think there was any threat of actually having to serve. And then there are 3 people from the city who ran around with nomination forms and basically encouraged people to nominate me. So apparently the city got a raft of nominations for me. And I was told straight up by somebody I wasn't going to be it, and I was sure that was true. And then I was at a reading where the person I was told was going to get it ended up being introduced as the San Francisco Poet Laureate. And I thought, well, there's the answer then, is I didn't get it. And then I got a phone call from City Hall. So it's a weird experience. It causes a lot of things to happen. It sets a lot of things in motion. There are privileges. There are a lot of, inevitably, because this is true of all poetry things, if you get any kind of honor, if you're published in a place, if you get an honor, if you get an award, if you get nominated for something, there are always people who are either jealous or angry about you being there and have judgments about what your work is like, or what you do. And I just felt, I knew that there were a couple of people who'd really argued for me to do it, to be it. And so I felt like I had to take it very seriously. And so I've done, I think the average, because of the shutdowns, has been, I've done an average over the course of these almost 3 years of 20 readings a month. Wow. I organize 5 a month. I've helped people get published. I've read a lot of manuscripts. I've blurbed many, many things. I've published a lot. And I've supported a lot of other younger poets. And I don't say that as a person who's trying to be a gatekeeper, because I think that's gatekeeping is what leads to the circumstances that require the Me Too movement. There have to be no gatekeepers. Nobody recommends somebody else if they don't think they can be good at a thing, So the people I've supported and helped get published, that wasn't my doing, it was the doing of their work. I just want to be clear about it. But I feel like when you're in a position like a laureate, you people answer your phone calls, so it's worth using that tool to get some doors open. And what's also true is people keep telling me this is the case, and I think it may be true. At first, folks were saying I was the first native laureate, but since I took over from Alejandro Murguia, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that's because of the way we count who's native and who isn't, not anything about me. But I am the first enrolled native laureate of a major city, which uh, seemed much more important to Indian country before Joy became the laureate of the country.
Right.
But it's
But
true.
some ways that suits your personality, right? That's some pressure right off, right? It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
it was great. It was fabulous.
great.
I have read with her a number of times, and so when they announced it, I said, "Great, you can do this now. Have it." Um, yeah, it's
Yeah, I was actually there in 2011 when Alejandro was awarded the poet laureateship.
yeah,
When it was during the San Francisco International Poetry Festival with the Jack
yeah,
put together.
yeah,
Yeah, and he came out with like a zoot suit.
yeah,
Yeah, that was a great moment. That was a great moment.
yeah. We definitely have different styles. We knew each other because we both well, we both taught in ethnic studies at SF
Yeah,
State,
yeah.
so we've known each other for a long time. That was another funny thing is that somebody called me up and was like, "So you're connected with you're the laureate of the city, and you're connected with San Francisco State," which may be the only thing that all of the laureates have in common apart from poetry. You know, so I pointed out to them the different ways in which everyone was actually connected to San Francisco State. Like it's not unique with me. In fact, the only thing that's kind of cool about it was that it was essentially one ethnic studies department person getting replaced by another ethnic studies department person, which I thought was really cool and said something interesting about that era of San Francisco State Ethnic Studies Department.
Yeah. And you both have a series of very impressive hats. You know, like
We
that's
do, we
yeah,
do
yeah,
have good hats.
yeah.
Although I have to say, I think my squid hat wins. But, yeah.
So, what has it been like to work with the San Francisco library system?
um, you don't ever really work with a system, you work with individuals. Um, and there are a lot of really cool people that I've worked with. Um, and my tenure has straddled, um, Luis and Michael's leadership of, as city librarian. I've I've really enjoyed working with the people that I've worked with by and large. There are a couple of exceptions, and we won't call them out. But for the most part, I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah. No, the San Francisco library system is or San Francisco, the people that run it are from the outside perspective really well known for.
Well, they're true believers, and we are, I think, the top library system in the country, um, according to some rubric that happens back in Washington. We won some award that
Right.
said that, so
It must be true.
it must
It
be
must be,
true.
it must be true. So can you tell us a little bit about your role as a teacher, as a professor? What is it that you want to, what is it that when someone takes your class, what can they expect? What are they going to experience?
Who takes my class?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't teach anymore.
Oh, well, when they used to. I mean, let's go back in time. What was your
I got not rehired, which is language carefully chosen so that you can't say you were fired and do anything about it. Um, what was the experience? Okay, so I've mostly taught in ethnic studies. So basically, I've tried to give people a perspective through um, lyric traditions, mostly of what um, what is culturally unique about particularly Southeastern Native tribal entities? So um, if you think about it, it's kind of a cool moment for Southeastern Native people because Joy Harjo and I are both Southeastern, she being Muskogee and me being Cherokee. Um, we have a specific way of being that's not like being Lakota, which is what a lot of people have heard about, or Navajo, which is what a lot of people have heard about too. We're different groups. We're farmers. There's a lot in a way that we're different. And I think it dictates the way our writing goes as well. So I start a class by posing a question, which I will now pose to you. My Native poetry class starts this way. Who do you suppose is the most famous Native American, the most successful Native American writer?
Me, Tecumseh. I'm kind of a revolutionary guy, so I'm just thinking of people that like whatever.
Go for it.
What's that? John Trudell? I don't know who would be the.
Oh, John Trudell. That's not a bad one. That's one I don't usually get. That's an awesome answer to that question. Um, I'm going to say it's probably Martin Cruz Smith, but you can make an argument for John Trudell. But a lot of people don't know that Martin Cruz Smith is Native.
Right,
So
right.
I use that to open up the conversation about what is Native writing as opposed to Native writers, because Cruz Smith writes Cold War pot boilers, right?
Right.
And it also sort of questions what is success, and how do you define it? And that kicks off a conversation that basically ties the rest of the semester together. So what I tend to do then is I've organized a concept of indigeneity that is by region rather than by era, or by a lot of it's by era. Generally, you learn it that way. These are the early writers. And I try to do it both by era and by region. So with urban being one of the regions, and I think that's, although it's a little counterintuitive, I feel like John Trudell's success was all in urban. So that's when we deal with him. So,
Yeah.
But there are a lot. And the San Francisco Bay Area being the endpoint of the relocation projects of the last century, there have been a lot of incredible Native writers in the Bay Area. So it's a fun conversation. So you get a real grounding. It's not a fetish version of what Indigenous writing is. It's a much more involved, deeper delve into it.
Yeah. I had the opportunity to interview Nick Estes, and he mentioned a lot about how, or he mentioned that there are far more, or there are more natives. I don't know what the numbers are, but there are more natives in the cities than on reservations. But
That's
people outside don't
sort of
really.
true, but sort of not true. And it depends on how you count. And it's very complicated. And then not everybody has reservations. Some of them are just territories, and some of them are, they call different things. So even digging into that, although that's the easiest way to say a thing that's really true, there are other things that sound contradictory that are also true. So it's always so complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably.
Okay.
For what I know he's talking about, yeah, probably. Um, at the same time, in the 70s, we went through this phase where everybody was trying to out Indian one another, so it was like, and also it became very pan-Indian. So like people are shocked. My people don't sweat. We don't do sweat. We don't do powwows. It's a different thing. We do them now. I didn't my grandmother never made fry bread. She always did biscuits and gravy, which is regional thing and also a tribal thing. So, I mean, the divisions are more notable than the cohesions, really. But the San Francisco Bay Area has the the largest diverse population of Native people. So we're 1 and 2 with LA, and it depends on how you count Native.
Mhm.
But there are a lot of different tribal groups represented in the Bay Area, which makes us all slightly more conversant with one another's cultural uh, context, I guess. The Cherokees were sent out here. A lot of Cherokees were sent out here earlier, and so there's the history of it's fairly interesting. It hasn't been well written yet, and I could go off on this because I did teach this for a really long time, but but that yeah, the roots go pretty deep. I mean, not in my family. My dad was from Oklahoma, but my mom's from here for forever. But my dad is from Oklahoma, so my Cherokee is directly from our relocation point, you know, in the early 1800s. So.
Can you talk a little bit about the most recent book, Deer Trails?
It's an interesting debate, which is the most recent book.
Okay.
There's Deer Trails, which I'm happy to talk about. I also have another chapbook out called Murdered Missing, which is about murdered and missing Indigenous Native women. And I think technically you might be right that Deer Trails is the latest one, but they kind of came out the same week. It is again, it's part of the San Francisco Poet Laureate series. God, that's awful glare there. And it's available through City Lights and some other local bookstores. It's a collection of, basically it's a love letter to San Francisco, which is a place that I do love very much. We've seen some changes recently and we're going to see more. It'll be interesting to see how we come out of this and how much of what I wrote about is not around anymore.
Yeah. Well, what? I mean, I know there was recently a giant fundraiser for City Lights, right?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah, I was in that. Yeah, I guess Josiah Luis Alderete organized that, and Juan Felipe read, and Tongo read. A lot of really great poets read, and I read too. It looks like City Lights is going to be okay.
Right.
Might be okay. I'm more concerned about some of the smaller places like Alley Cat, which has been a real nexus, particularly with their writer in residence program. Mm-hmm. Bird and Beckett, which is an incredible resource. I don't know if you ever come to the open mics there. That's a pretty great. I can be arrogant about that open mic, even though I'm a co-host, because I didn't start it.
Right. Well, tell us.
It's really, well, Poets usually happens the first and third Monday of the month. And now that we're doing it on Zoom, it's happening the second and fourth Monday of the month. It's been going for quite some time now, usually organized by Jerry Faraz as a callback to the Babar poet scene. It's demographically, it's shifted a little bit in recent years. It used to be way more North Beach poets, and sort of some of the older neighborhood poets, and it's gotten kind of a younger feel of late, which is pretty good. The online version, I'm a bit more of a martinet about how long I want people to read for. So it's like one poem as long as it's not the Iliad, I don't know about you. I find it very difficult with multi-person Zoom to focus for too long. I don't know. Maybe that's just my pre-digital mind operating. I think Zoom readings are probably going to continue to have a relevance, but I think the rules of open mics are going to change for Zoom on Zoom. You know what I mean? because you can't really do the same thing. Also, unless you turn your camera off, you are on camera all the time, and a lot of people don't seem to quite take that in. You
No,
know?
I didn't figure that out yet.
Yeah. I was on. I felt like a whiz kid last night. I was on one that was
Yeah,
that Foothills Press did,
yeah,
and nobody turned off their mic afterwards, so they kept having to turn off all the mics at once, and you can hear everybody typing, and there's this one woman wandering around in the background. It's like,
yeah. No, it's like I can see you like responding to your emails, and nodding every now and again.
I see you doing that, yeah.
Yeah,
And I see you folding clothes, which, as fascinating as that is,
yeah.
yeah.
You have me on the background like radio music. Yeah, no, it's
Right,
that's what's happening.
yeah.
So it makes you kind of wonder, like when they're there, are they folding clothes in their mind?
It does make you wonder what people's brains do at the reading. I mean, one
Yeah,
of the things that we do at Bird and Beckett for the live readings is that the lights get dimmed, you know, and um, it helps you feel anonymous. But it's an interesting thing with this, with our current pandemic situation. I think people in cities are finding out that they are less anonymous. You know, we do all live in community, whether we behave as though we are living that way or not. And it will be interesting to see how much of that awareness we can take out into the world with us. I mean, I don't know about you, if you ever lived in a small town, you know that the stuff you do, even if you've got a headache, you're in a grumpy place, the stuff you do once you step out of your house is really everybody's business. They all know about it and will chatter about it, you know? Um, which has been, just to call back to the laureate thing, it's been an interesting thing about the laureate thing because of taking down the statue in Civic Center, because of my writing about murdered and missing Indigenous women and other political things I've been involved in. I got a death threat, and then the death threat was renewed, which for me, when you're getting a death threat from essentially the Klan, that means I'm doing my job. If I could figure out where to put that in my resume, I would, because I feel like it means I'm writing clearly enough to where they know I'm not writing for them and they're reading something, which has got to be good. So we're all in our lane, right? But being totally not anonymous is also interesting. So I've had experiences where my postal carrier that's usually on our route um, will be handing out my picture all day, right? We had somebody come and ring the doorbell at 7 o'clock in the morning one morning, and which is a bit early. And I was up, but I had snuck out of bed because my partner was not awake and I'd lost one sock. So I'm wearing one sock, but it's like halfway up my foot. And I'm wearing a pair of sweatpants, which we're going to generously call sleep sweatpants. It's nothing you'd wear outside of the house, and a giant men's t-shirt. And I'd come downstairs and grabbed a banana, and the doorbell rang. So I came to the door with a banana, like I've described, with my hair doing whatever it does.
yeah.
Um, and after sleeping on it, it's not usually ready for prime time. And I opened the door, and this woman's staring at me. So we looked at one another for a little while, and I said, "Is there something I could do for you?" And she said, "I just wanted to make sure you really live here." And the sarcasm button got pushed. And so scanning across my cortex, I'm thinking, no, I don't live here. This is my cat burglar costume. This banana. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. If I don't live here, I'm having an affair with the person who does, right? So I was like, uh-huh. It's just interesting, the extent to which you stop belonging to yourself as much as you think you do, and how much you sort of belong uh, to a community in a different way.
Yeah, well, they still shouldn't be knocking your door at 7 a.m. just to.
Yeah, that's a dangerous thing to do. You never know what mood somebody's going to be in at that hour.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, no, I mean, so what was the resolution on the death threat?
It's not resolved. They would still like to see me dead. I mean, I sat in a meeting at City Hall with the guy sitting next to me who, for an hour and a half, was telling me he was going to kill me and pull my eyes out. And at some point, he's just like, I am actually tired of talking about it now. I think we can predict that this will be over at a certain point if you would like to discuss it further when we're not sitting surrounded by sheriff's deputies. But they ended up taking him away because somebody else heard him say it. And it's actually apparently illegal to do that.
Yeah,
There's no resolution. But generally, the kind of person who's going to tell you they're going to do that are not the person you have to worry about. You keep the cat in for a couple of weeks, you know, but I don't mean to sound flip about it. It's a little weird having people say it would be better if you were not around. You know, I'm sure people think it, but having somebody say it is a whole different dance. So
yeah,
I just think it means I'm doing my job.
yeah. No, definitely. I'm definitely doing it well. It's really been a great, honor to have you here. So what, we're approaching the hour. So what advice or what words of wisdom do you have to offer to all the people right now, all the poets? You mentioned imposter syndrome earlier.
Yeah, we
You,
all have it. I have it.
you seem to push through to some. I mean, you push through to the point where you could, you know, still accomplish a lot of things and still get through. So what advice do you have for people when you feel it? What can you do to what can you do to keep on keeping on?
I think anything like that that's going to distract you from working on your stuff, you probably have to take a minute, take a look at it, admit you're feeling that way, and then set it to the side and just get on with things. You can't, a lot of poets I know have hamstrung their careers. I don't know. I mean, I was an early hippie child. My parents had children early, and dad was a military man, but mom was arguably a hippie. And I guess I was just raised with the perspective that um, you have to do the things that really snag on your attention. Things will present themselves to you that you have no option but to deal with, and you have to just deal with them, you know? I have better advice about overcoming writer's block than I do about that.
Let's
I
hear
haven't
it.
overcome my imposter syndrome.
Yeah, let's overcome our block then. Yeah, give me something they can use. Well, what can they with some practical stuff? What can they do to overcome writer's block?
Overcome writer's block. Okay, pick up, collect the work of people whose poetry you like. Okay, whether that's bookmarking pages on the internet or buying books, right? And then go to those pieces and read them and see, because the thing that makes me want to write more than anything else is always listening to other people read. So just develop your own lexicon of work, your own sort of collection, your own um, definitions of things that inspire you. And then if you're stuck, just read for a while, you know, or listen for a while, because that's another option. I mean, there are a lot of great options. You've had people on the show who are great. Devora Major is amazing for breaking mine, but I've written some very weird stuff that doesn't sound like my work after listening to Tonga Wise and Martin. So, just sort of, and Josiah Luis is another one of those people. I could make a huge list for you. Joey Harjo is incredible for that for me as well. But that's my best advice. And I've given it to students for years, and people come back to me years later and say it really worked. Is like, if you are stuck, go read something that you really enjoy. and just get to it. It'll pop you out of it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we've been joined this hour by the current poet laureate of San Francisco, Kim Schuck. It's been a huge honor. I really really appreciate this. It's been a Dawes Center for the Arts presentation, and thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
Wonderful.
Take care.